There's a mistake. Moonlight, you guys won Best Picture.
You like me right now. You like me.
Ever since I was a little kid, I wanted this.
Mom, I just want an Oscar.
I'm Connor Walden. Welcome back to another episode of the Ultimate Oscar Showdown. And this week we are once again looking at the Best Actor category. This week looking at the 2000s decade. So essentially I'm going to be ranking the Best Actor winners from the decade of the 2000s between S tier and D tier, S tier being the highest, S, A, B, C, and then D. We're just going to be talking about the performance itself, not necessarily my thoughts on the movie as a whole. And there's some overlap with, the Best Picture winners, but for the most part, almost all the movies, especially in this decade, except for one, I believe, the performance doesn't win Best Picture in the Best Lead Actor category. So there's going to be a lot of still new movies that we can talk about, and we're going to be focusing still more on the performances. So if you enjoy the video, like the video, comment below, let me know your thoughts on the rankings in the tiers. That always helps. And subscribe to the channel if you'd like to watch these videos. Monday at around 10 o'clock Eastern time, I usually try to upload videos consistently. We've been doing that now for almost 7 years, 6.5 years, so appreciate the support if you have the opportunity. But without further ado, let's start into things. Starting off with Russell Crowe in Gladiator. Now, I've already talked about the movie on my 2000s Best Picture ranking video, so we won't go too in-depth with it. But what I appreciate so much about the movie is this Russell Crowe performance. I think it is the perfect Russell Crowe performance. I think no one else could have portrayed it. And I think he's perfect as a sort of stoic philosopher warrior. Of course, Maximus is a fictionalized character, but, protege is Marcus Aurelius, who is an iconic stoic philosopher. And I stay stoic because on one hand, Crowe is able to portray the emotion, the intellect, and the sort of philosophy of his stature in life, his goal, his kind of ultimate revenge, really beautifully in some of the quieter, softer scenes and the emotional scenes, particularly with his family. But then also he's able to unleash the physical elements so that he feels like a real strong warrior, someone who is intellectual but also a incredible, combat hand-to-hand warrior that's able to command an army. I think so much of the success of the film is reliant on us believing that this guy could actually command an army, and Crowe is able to do that with ease. So an iconic Russell Crowe performance and a great leading man kind of movie star performance. It's also a great acting performance, so it goes into the A tier for me, same as the movie. Then 2001, Denzel Washington in Training Day, which is a bit of a controversial winner at the time and still is amongst Oscar voters. I think in part because my theory is that this is part of the greatest Oscar kind of a tragedy history linear narrative, and that is to say 1974, Art Carney wins for Harry and Tonto, beating out Al Pacino in Godfather Part 2. And Al Pacino in Godfather Part 2 is this iconic performance, but they gave it to Art Carney because he's the older actor. We'll give it to Al a little bit later. Then they do give it to Al a little bit later in 1992, but he has to beat out Denzel Washington in Malcolm X, another sort of iconic performance. But we have to give it to Al because he's never gotten one before. Then, because they didn't give it to Denzel for Malcolm X, they give it to him for Training Day in 2001. Who does he beat out? Will Smith and Ali. And then Will Smith spends the next 2 decades really doing sort of middling dramas, trying to become an Oscar winner. Finally does with King Richard, beating out, I think, the better younger actor in Benedict Cumberbatch. But then King Richard leads to the Will Smith slap and potentially ruins his career forever. I mean, we're not sure where that stands right now, but the past 3 years for Will haven't been good. And it's just this really interesting sort of linearity where if Will Smith wins for Ali, then he probably doesn't do the slap for King Richard. It's not this big momentous night that he's been waiting 20 years for, and he's not so stressed that he does that. There's all this sort of weird butterfly effects. And in the middle of that is Training Day. Now, I actually think Denzel probably should have won for Malcolm X and for Training Day. I think he should probably have 3 Oscars by now. He's that great of an actor. And I've never really totally gotten the criticisms of the performance or the movie, really. And I think that Denzel, similar to someone like a Joker we covered last week, he's a total live wire. Alonzo is this incredibly over-the-top, charismatic, larger-than-life figure. He's smiling and laughing, and then the next sentence is incredibly serious. His approach to the job is ethically dubious, to say the least, but then also maybe very realistic and maybe the right way to approach things. And because we're like Ethan Hawke's character, Jake, on the first day, we don't know this guy, we sort of get the idea of wanting to make him like you, wanting to be the partner, not necessarily exactly sure how to feel about all this stuff. Is this stuff all legal, or is this how things get done? And Denzel's ability to flip between those two modes is the reason why the movie works, is the reason why there's so much tension throughout the sustained runtime, because we really don't know who this guy is, and we're trying to figure him out. And Denzel's always sort of, moving back and forth, and you're not able to fully understand who this character is. And then when you rewatch it, knowing the events of the film, you start to understand things and see things that Denzel's playing without the audience necessarily know what is going to happen. So there is rewatchability factor to that as well. And just the end sort of scene, that King Kong ain't got shit on me scene, I think is a masterclass in acting, just in how much of a command he has in the screen. The focus in the actual shot, if you watch it on DVD or YouTube or something, it actually looks almost out of focus. There's a real sort of tight close-up that the camera moves a lot. But it doesn't matter. The emotion, the strength of the performance is just so overpowering that you feel it. And he has such, what I always think of in this movie, command of the movie. He's in control. He knows every line to a T. He's able to manipulate you into thinking one thing and then subverting that in the next way. It's a total powerhouse kind of performance. And for me, iconic cinema. So it's an S tier performance for me. Truly one of my favorite, getting me hyped Denzel performances. Then in 2002, Adrian Brody for The Pianist. So while the Denzel Washington win is a little bit controversial in Oscar circles, The Pianist is a movie that's actually controversial because of the connection with Roman Polanski. And like any other movie, we don't really talk about the history behind it so much as we talk about the movie, or in this case the performance itself. So I understand if you don't want to watch this movie or feel uncomfortable watching it, but I have seen it and I want to cover it for the show because of the format, and we're just going to be talking about the movie itself. And I think the movie itself is really terrific, and Adrian Brody is terrific because of that. And I think, I don't want to make this sound like a diss, but I really think Adrian Brody's the best person in this movie at playing a cockroach, because that's what this man has sort of been sentenced to be. He's this sort of brash pianist and then transforms into the skinny, bearded man. And this is not necessarily a Holocaust movie. It's a movie about the Holocaust, yes, but it's very rarely set in camps. It's about this man who sort of, you see the systematic racism and genocide of the Jewish people by moving them in Warsaw, of being in this affluent neighborhood. Then we get to smaller ghettos, and then worse ghettos, and then they're in a square of ghettos, and they've lost all of their possessions. And then he finally gets out, and then he has to live in these places, in these homes, and he has to be quiet, and he's eating and drinking very little. And that's why I say cockroach, because he's not a man anymore. The Germans and the Nazis forced him to be an insect, just focused purely on survival, and he's in these places that he's not supposed to be, and he's so skinny, and he's very silent, so he does feel like some sort of cockroach, some sort of insect that is trying to survive. And I think that's what Adrian Brody is so great at doing, and he's solid for that. Now, the movie doesn't give him a lot to necessarily work with, because I think the appeal of the movie is that he's sort of anonymous, that he's just a pianist, that this is one guy, but this is happening to everybody, and there's no necessarily something special about him that makes him survive. He just had a little bit better connections and was willing to, stand out and wait and be patient. I think that's the success of the film. But just because of that approach, it doesn't necessarily give Adrian Brody a lot to work with in terms of maybe big emotional speeches or subtle acting things. So, but in terms of the physicality, he totally nails that, and it works so well within the movie. And I think the movie works well because we believe in this guy and we want this guy to survive. He's not some sort of jerk. We don't like him. We do like Adrian Brody in this movie. So I do think his performance is very solid in the movie. So it's going to go into the B tier. Then 2003, Sean Penn in Mystic River, one of the first Sean Penn wins of this decade, and a strange actor post-Milk, because when you think of his movies, there's very few of them post-Milk in 2008. He won these two Oscars in the 2000s, but his 2010s are very sporadic. I mean, he's doing bit parts in Secret Life of Walter Mitty and Licorice Pizza, but his true last leading role is probably Milk in 2008. I mean, he has very little in between. Now he focuses a lot on activism, and has done very well in that, and is very successful, so I'm sure that's better than, just acting. But still, selfishly, I do think he was a little bit more active in the acting sphere. So while I don't actually really love this movie, I do think that Penn's performance in it is really terrific, because he's perfect at playing the tough guy, particularly just because of his face. Certain actors, modern day older actors like George Clooney or Tom Cruise, they're old, but they still look like sort of slightly older versions than their younger self. Still very handsome. Tom Cruise still does the football scene in Top Gun Maverick and takes his shirt off. But actors in the 80s and even more so in the 40s or something like that, if you look at Paul Newman or Humphrey Bogart or James Coburn or something like Affliction, I mean, their faces look like leather gloves. They're worn down. They age a lot quicker, I think, because the drinking and the sort of harder life that they lived. And because of that, there's something to the face where it looks weathered, it looks worn down, it looks like you've lived a life, it looks like you've got your hands dirty. And I think Sean Penn has that sort of face and is aged into that face, and does so beautifully and masterfully here in Mystic River. You feel like this ex-con tough guy in Jimmy really does control the neighborhood, really is menacing, really would go out of his way to figure out who killed his daughter, and adds some of the tension to the story. Of course, the emotional scenes he also handles very well, even if it's a little bit melodramatic. But his command of some of the sort of just porch scenes that he has within this community, of where he's trying to psychologically trying to understand if someone knows something that they're not telling him and get that information out of him. It's an interesting approach, and I think Penn communicates that very well. So for me, the performance is a B tier performance. Jamie Foxx in Ray. Recently, Jamie Foxx has been put into the hospital, so latest update, we don't know too much about it, sort of conflicting information, so we wish him the best regardless. That being said, when talking about the movie Ray, it's never been a movie I've been totally in love with, and because of that, I've sort of struggled with Jamie Foxx's performance. I think in large part, I can't help but see Jamie Foxx playing Ray Charles rather than Ray Charles himself. He looks a lot like him. He gets a lot of the mannerisms down. I give him credit for the singing, but certain ways he tries to emphasize the story, and some of the sort of generic biopic structure of the story doesn't allow Foxx to really get to the heart and core of the psychological and emotional sense of this character, but stays a little bit more surface level of the icon of Ray Charles rather than the person of Ray Charles. And for me, I've never really gotten past, this is Jamie Foxx playing Ray Charles instead of, oh no, this is an actor playing Ray Charles. The sort of charisma and the persona of Foxx is almost too much to transform into Ray Charles just for me. So never been a performance or a movie really that I've totally loved. So it's going to go into the C tier. Philip Seymour Hoffman in Capote, I think one of the most underrated movies of the 2000s. I think a total masterpiece from one of the most underrated directors of the 2000s in Bennett Miller. And, I think one of the great tragedies of the 2010s was Philip Seymour Hoffman passing, because we were robbed of so many great performances. I really do think Philip Seymour Hoffman, along with Daniel Day-Lewis or Christian Bale or some of these guys, where you go, this is one of the best actors of his generation. This is iconic status. And watching all of his movies, there's very rarely a Philip Seymour Hoffman performance that you don't like. He's always so well tuned in. And I think people look at this performance and they go, well, hey, I'm glad Philip Seymour Hoffman won an Oscar. But I think a lot of people still think that it's kind of generic biopic crap, sort of him putting on a Truman Capote impression, and he should have gotten it for something else. I don't think so at all. I think this is a really transcendent performance. I think it's one of his best performances. I put it up there with The Master or Owning Mahoney or something like that, in terms of, or Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, in terms of like A-tier Hoffman performances. Because I think he's able to understand the icon of Capote, but also this actual case. In Cold Blood is an iconic book from him. It's probably his iconic book, yet it's his last book. It's a book that he wrote near the end of his life and took years to write. And I think that, he's great in the sort of Truman Capote impression scenes, in the dinner party type scenes, in just the fact that he's very small and diminutive. I think they're able to sort of capture Truman Capote's lack of size very well in the movie. But the great part of the movie is that he's also able to turn that off and have a very sort of naturalistic relationship with his friend Harper Lee, but then also an emotional connection between Perry Smith. And that connection is real, and Hoffman helps us understand this sort of strange historic relationship about innocence and lost hope and true connection and love, but also heartbreak. It's a fascinating story, just the way this evolved. We also sort of see some more subtle things I think Hoffman brings to it. The fact that he's becoming more and more reliant on alcohol, the sort of depression of the case really lingered into him, which he expresses through his novel. But in terms of the performance of the movie, we really see the sort of transformation in that regard without going through a huge, big transformation. It's more subtle, but if you're paying attention, it's clear. And just some basic stuff of just him in conversations with Perry Smith, and we get close-ups and we see the character just shine through. He really does become Capote, and it's not the strange accent or some of his mannerisms, it's the heart, it's the emotion, and the truth of the character that Hoffman's able to bring forward. So I love Philip Seymour Hoffman, I love this movie, I love this performance, totally S tier for me. Forest Whitaker, The Last King of Scotland, a movie that I actually had never seen, but I was very surprised to see Whitaker be labeled as the best lead actor for this movie, because it's very clear that this is James McAvoy's movie and that today Whitaker probably would campaign in the supporting actor category. But regardless, I understood why he won for this performance. It's a great performance, because so much of, I think, Whitaker's performance, is the way I think of him, is an actor that is more reserved, is a little bit more quiet, and he counterbalances that with his larger size. But in this movie, it's the opposite. He's big in his size, of course, but then his performance style is boisterous and big and charismatic and sociopathic. And he really allows himself to go sort of over the top and grandiose, and is great at that. Similarly to someone like Alonzo Harris in Training Day, there is a bipolar aspect to his character, in the sense that you don't know if he's going to laugh or he's going to be really serious. You don't know how to please him, which I think represents some of the instability that he runs his country with, and some of the dichotomies of his grand, beautiful home and then the poor parts of his nation. And his charisma helps you understand why a guy like James McAvoy would sort of be so enamored with this guy and decide to dedicate his life to him, because of some of the fascinations and what he says about the country, but then sort of getting too caught up with it all, with this man of power and influence that is clearly kind of sociopathic, and more and more revealing to himself, revealing to us as the movie goes on. So a fascinating performance, a great performance from Forest Whitaker, definitely solid, and for me, totally A tier stuff, one of Whitaker's best. Then 2007, Daniel Day-Lewis, There Will Be Blood. I mean, what is there to say about this? An iconic performance, a performance that will go down in the annals of film history as one of the best of all time. We talked about Daniel Day-Lewis being so great as Lincoln. Last week, this is another, I'll spoil it, S-tier performance for me, and totally iconic in terms of his command of the screen, in terms of his intensity, in terms of the ambition that is, very rarely you see ambition on screen be more reserved and more quiet. We see this man as a repressed man, a man with tunnel vision and focus on one thing, and advancing his social status, and getting as much oil as possible, and being someone of importance and grandiosity, and that sort of masculine drive to succeed and repress and push people away, and just focus on your craft or your path and plan, and just the subtleties of the opening scene of him breaking his leg and then dragging himself to get help, and the fact that he survived that. You think he can survive anything and will be ruthless towards that. A truly sort of manipulative, masterful performance from There Will Be Blood, a performance you can't look away from. And I think probably if you were to pick one, Daniel Day-Lewis's defining performance. So like I said, S tier stuff for sure. Then 2008, Sean Penn for Milk, another Penn win here, and probably my preferred performance between the two, just because I like the movie Milk a little bit more. And what I like about this movie and Penn's approach to this character is that he feels like a real guy. So many people playing political leaders or larger-than-life figures want to see them as great. If you look at someone like a Daniel Kaluuya in Judas and the Black Messiah, there's not a lot of humanity necessarily, I think, in Fred Hampton. He's a guy who is seen as this sort of great, influential political figure, and I think Kaluuya has so much reverence for him that he plays him that way. But Penn plays Harvey Milk as more of a real guy who just tries to approach his community and help his community out. And it's an interesting conversation, I think, whether or not Sean Penn would have played this performance in, say, 2023, a non-queer actor. Would they have given it to, an actual queer actor today? Probably. But then also, you look at 2008, this movie wouldn't have gotten made without Sean Penn. And I think the fact that this movie got so many accolades for his performance helped, I think, a lot of people who had maybe anti-gay beliefs see a little bit more of the side and more empathy. Let's not forget, this is 2008. Gay marriage is not legal in the United States. Barack Obama, who was the president, who just became president at the time, was against gay marriage. This wasn't even a topic. It wasn't until 2013 in which they legalized it. So Penn, who knows whether or not this movie would have gotten made with a gay actor, and maybe this was the movie that was the step necessary to make before you can make those types of movies. Hard to say in the modern day age, but what I will still say is I think Penn is so great in the performance because he takes a sort of tough guy attitude that he's known for, and I think subverts it in many ways, because this feels like a regular guy who's not necessarily always sure of his beliefs. He's unsure if he's the type of guy to run things. He's a complicated kind of home life. He's kind and empathetic, and that's sort of the opposite of these sort of big, boisterous, powerful leaders. He's just sort of a nice guy who wants to do something for his community and knows what he truly believes in is rights, but still is struggling with whether or not he should be the guy to do it, or how to lead these people, or how to change the world. He just knows what he believes in and fights for that. So I think Penn is really terrific in this performance, so I'm going to give it a great A-tier performance. And then finally, we have Jeff Bridges in Crazy Heart. This is an actor that I covered early on my Movie Star Magic series, which is the series I did last year, where I covered an actor's movies and I looked at what made them great and what was their movie star magic. And because of that series, I watched a lot of Jeff Bridges movies, and I was really amazed watching his movies because they were so great over and over again. And you realize how dominant he's been for like 50 years. I mean, it's really 5 decades. Very few actors have that sort of a dominance, but he does. And this is sort of a career cap for his entire career of how great he's been, even though I don't think this is his best performance, or maybe even in his top 5. And yet he's still great, because Jeff Bridges is great as always. There's never a bad Jeff Bridges performance. So he's still solid in this, playing Bad Blake, this alcoholic country singer who tries to get his life together after meeting a journalist played by Maggie Gyllenhaal. But my favorite scene in the movie, and what's so great about Bridges, you can see his performance, it is in the scene between Gyllenhaal and Bridges meeting for the first time in the motel room. If you just look at the scene, the way Bridges puts his arms, elbows on his knees, and just the way he breathes out quickly when he's smoking the cigarette, or the way he leans back and he sort of quickly puts his shirt over his belly a little bit. There's these small sort of things that make it feel like this is a real guy, that there's not a false note, that this guy's been in so many motels, that he's smoked so many cigarettes. It's like breathing to him. So when you see him just sort of carry himself, particularly in that scene, and watch it, you don't go, oh, this is Jeff Bridges acting, or this is an actor trying to add something. It just feels real, feels natural, feels like this guy has done these motions 100 times, thousands of times. It feels all natural, and Bridges is able to capture that in this really beautiful, magical way. Some of the other scenes in the rest of the movie are a little bit more melodramatic and grandiose, so maybe knocked his performance down a little bit, but you still get glimpses of genius Bridges, because he's, like I said, he's great in every movie. So for me, it's still a B-tier performance. But that's been it, guys. Take a look at the list. Maybe not as good of a decade as the 2010s, but still, some S-tier stuff. So, same amount of S-tier stuff as the 2010s now that I think about it. So good in that regard too. Next week we're going to be covering the 1990s. Stay tuned for that. Like I said, if you liked the video, comment below. Let me know your thoughts, your rankings in the comments down below. That's why I make these videos, to create a great film community. So I encourage you to do that. A little bit of thought exercise for you. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.